Imagine two brothers, same parents, same DNA, same childhood, they're coming from a similar culture, essentially, quite similar language. Maybe there's a little bit of a geographical difference though, right? There could be one that's more mountainous than the other. One of the brothers becomes a surgeon. They live in a modern city. You got your skyscrapers, your light, glass windows, modern conveniences, but the other brother starves in the dark, working in a field like it's hundreds of years ago with his bare hands. By the way, this is not fiction. This is Korea. One people, but two systems, two different fates, completely different, just because of luck of birth on one side of the 38th parallel versus the other. The line between them isn't just a border, it's a belief system. Every success story you've seen started with the same first step: downloading the Wealth Builders Toolkit. We're giving it away free to celebrate the launch of our first live cohort. So if you haven't grabbed yours yet, do it now. Click the link in the description to get your free copy while it's still available. After World War II, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel. Now, both sides had the same culture, the same language, same traditions, even similar war scars. They were pretty much bombed on both sides, the Japanese, the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese. But one side, the North, they built their system based on control, if you will, while as the other side, the South, they built their system based on freedom, for lack of a better word. Now, both, they started poor, right? They're equally poor. They started at the same side. They're both bombed flat during the war. They both were facing hunger, but they made opposite moral bets, if you will. So they started at the same starting point, but they ended up at completely different finish lines. The North trusted the state. The South trusted its people, despite the slogans in the North. So economics, it's not just math. As an economist by profession, I know that it's morality in motion. In fact, the father of economics was a moral philosopher. Adam Smith, up in Scotland, was teaching moral philosophy. His earlier book was The Theory of Moral Sentiment. It was only later on that he turned out and created The Wealth of Nations, which is the early book on economics. Now, North Korea, they banned private property. They trusted in Marx, they banned enterprise, and they banned faith. Again, just like Marx, that religion is the opium of the people. They promised equality, and that's fine. They promised equality, but they ultimately delivered oppression under a despotic dictatorship. Now, the society that puts equality before freedom, as Milton Friedman would say, will end up with neither. But the society that puts freedom before equality will end up with a great measure of both. South Korea, it opened its markets. It rewarded meritocracies. It built institutions based on trust. Of course, it didn't get everything right. That's just the nature of human life. But it got one thing crucial right. And we can see this with this natural experiment that freedom works. Again, it's a perfect natural historical experiment. We don't get much opportunities in economics, right? We're not like chemists. We can't go in and just test out theories in a lab, right, with different chemical reactions. We have to look at historical things. Two almost very similar countries, North and South Korea, the start. Let's try a bit of capitalism, democracy, freedom. Let's try a bit of communism. Let's try a bit of state-run control. And we'll see what happens, right? We run this for more than half a century at this point, almost 3/4 of a century, and we can see a big, big difference. Within just one generation, South Korea's GDP, or gross domestic product, so their productive capacity, it grew 300-fold. That's huge, it's colossal. The life expectancy, this is a big thing that kind of usually is tied up and goes along with GDP. It jumped by 30 years because with productive capacity, you can afford to basically provide for your citizens. Humans, individuals can afford better healthcare, right? Huge increase in life expectancy. And their exports, they went from rice in South Korea to semiconductors as it became more technologically advanced. The North, in the meanwhile, they essentially exported fear. Right, so I like showing an image to my students. I'm teaching economic growth. I show them a nighttime aerial image of North Korea and South Korea. And you can literally see the difference, all the blackout on the north side versus all the light on the south side. Now, it's a good proxy for gross domestic product or productive capacity because you can't really trust, the data coming from North Korea. So you look at the light night. And it really shows the living standards difference. But the real divide is not economic. It's going to be moral, as we will see. You see, South Korea, it goes one level deeper, right? It built a system that assumed that people are fallen, but they're free. The human beings, they're imperfect, sure, but they can create good. There's the potential for good through voluntary exchange. And we're going to see that capitalism really is voluntary. That is the key distinction here. So, keep an open mind with all of this. But North Korea, they built a system that assumes people are sinful and must be controlled. They must be nudged, to use a modern economic term. The morality essentially comes from the party, right? It doesn't come from moral philosophy or theology even. So we don't even have to get into full religion here. We can go one step above that and think about philosophy, think about sciences. Again, there's a whole hierarchy of the different areas. But just looking at where morality comes from, right? The party in the North dictates what is right and what is wrong. Whereas again, it's more left open to philosophy, right? An open mind thinking, thought in the South. So the results that we get, the outcome, very different outcome that is in the South, innovation, faith, accountability. Whereas in the North, you get fear, you get famine after famine after famine and forced worship of man, right? Instead of something greater, something deeper, beyond the human. So capitalism, it didn't make South Korea moral. It's simply just a reflection, right? The freedom gave the morality more room to breathe, right? Allowing people to do what they want, allowing them to express their morals, subject to a certain amount of law. Now, both Koreas, of course, they wanted a better life for their people. They believed in both sides that they were serving a greater good. You could say that's true under communism, it's true under capitalism, right? But capitalism doesn't have as good a PR team, essentially. So communism, it sounds great in practice, but it's not. It's in principle, but it doesn't really. If you actually examine it deeper, if you think about like the way even the idea of forcing, right? That effectively, if you don't own your labor and you're not given incentives, why would you work, right? To each according to its needs, from each according to its abilities. But if I know that we're all going to end up at the same point, why break my heart racing and running and trying, right? There's no point because we're all going to be the same. So I'm not going to do work as hard. We respond to incentives. As economists, like it's beaten into you the very first class, the very first year you take economics at college, we learn that incentives matter. People respond to incentives. That's a big lesson, right? And if you can create the right incentives, you can encourage the best result. But one system built incentives that reward work, taking risk, and also engaging in responsibility. The other system built incentives that punish all those. They don't reward work. They don't reward risk. They don't even reward responsibility, right? It's all like you're going to be given everything. Everything's going to be equal, but you're equally poor, right? We'll pretend to pay you and you pretend to work. So it's a huge difference between the North and the South. Incentives and intentions, very, very different. Good intentions don't feed people, incentives do. You get the first two letters and the last, in and S, right? Intentions, incentives, but incentives matter more than intentions. Do not judge a system based on its intentions, but judge it based on its outcomes. This is a key problem with a lot of modern day socialism and communism gets wrong. I'm not totally bashing them, but they think so much in terms of intentions. Look at the results. You might intend for a relationship to work. You might intend for chemicals to work. You might intend for 2 + 2 to be equal to 5. But look at the actual result. Look at the outcome. Judge a policy based on the outcomes, not on the intentions. This is something Thomas Sowell talks about. This is something that Milton Friedman talks about. Because when you own your own labor, this is what's wrong with slavery. And slavery and communism, you'll see they're kind of intertwined. When you own your own labor, you do work harder. When you know you're going to get rewarded. Because why would I work if I'm not rewarded by some way? So when you can fail, when you're allowed to fail, when you're allowed to fall, we're not talking about bailouts, right? That's not capitalism. When you're allowed to fail, you learn faster. I know personally, think of the person. I know that I've learned much more from my own failures than any of my successes. My failures taught me more. The negative emotion, just loss aversion, right? We know that in psychology, we know that in economics, that basically people respond more to negative emotion. One negative emotion is as strong as 3 positive emotions. So when you're free and you're allowed to fail, you flourish because you're able to learn from your mistakes, get back up and try again. By the way, if this part is clicking for you, you'll love the Wealth Builders Toolkit. It's the exact $197 system I use to plan and track all of this. I'm giving it away for free for a limited period. So grab it while it's still free. Links in the description. Ever try, ever fail. Never mind. Fail again, fail better. And that's not greed, by the way. That's human nature, and it's redeemed by responsibility. So, in the North, we've got millions of people that died from one famine after the next. While the regime was just building up these monuments, families were split apart for generations. The truth became illegal. Religion became rebellion. And it's not just an economic failure. It goes beyond that. It's a moral tragedy. As I talk about, Adam Smith, the father of economics, he was a moral philosopher. His early work was the theory of moral sentiments. Then he went on to produce the wonderful book, The Wealth of Nations, which was really the early book in economics. Now, this is just a reminder, right? Again, that when you try to perfect man by force, you destroy him. This is what North Korea and South Korea shows. Right? The evidence is there. The experiment has been done. We know the result. The Korean Peninsula is a living experiment in system, 75 years at this point. It's a control group divided by ideas. The North proves what happens when the state replaces liberty. The South proves what happens when the soul is free to create. You got the same people, the same land, different beliefs about truth, about freedom, about responsibility, and the results speak louder than ideology can ever speak. Freedom itself, it's not just an economic choice, it's a moral one. Because when you believe that you can free people, and when you actually free people, when you really free people, then their God-given inherent insight, intrinsic potential turns dust into destiny. The lesson that I take from North Korea and South Korea is that incentives reveal the truth about human nature. Capitalism doesn't need fixing, we do.